Part 3, Labor Trafficking in Canada. In this section, we will talk about labor trafficking in Canada and identify some red flag indicators. Labor trafficking includes situations of debt bondage, forced labor, and involuntary child labor. In Canada, common types of labor trafficking include situations where people are forced to work in homes as domestic workers, farm workers who are coerced through violence as they plant and harvest crops, or factory workers held in inhumane conditions with little to no pay. Labor trafficking is also known as forced labor, and it's really the control and exploitation of a person for their labor or service, usually through force, threats, or deception. Situations of labor exploitation often include very poor and unsafe working conditions, abuse, extremely long hours, and unfair or non-existent wages. Annually, Canada brings in nearly 1 million temporary foreign workers to fill the ever-growing gaps in our labor market. Recent focus groups with migrant workers conducted by the Centre and key service delivery partners found that 60% of the migrant workers surveyed were not aware of their labor rights in Ontario. This is just one of the systemic reasons why migrant workers are often targeted for this abuse. Bonded labor or debt bondage is widely used as a method to exploit people. Victims become bonded laborers when their labor becomes the means of repaying a loan or a service. Really, the value of their work is often greater than the original sum of money that was borrowed. However, they continue to accrue interest on that loan, or they continue to incur additional costs with no means to repay the original sum. Forced labor, like I mentioned, is a situation where victims are forced against their will under the threat of violence or some other punishment. Their freedom is restricted, and there is a degree of ownership or control that is exerted by the employer. So let's briefly talk about how labor trafficking happens in Canada. Victims can be exploited for labor trafficking after they arrive here in Canada, but often the foundation of the exploitation begins in a person's home country, where they are recruited under false pretenses or incur large debts for the opportunity to come to Canada to work. Upon arrival, they may be met by a facilitator or a manager who takes them to the job site. Unfortunately, what was promised in terms of wages, work responsibilities, workplace protections, workplace accommodations are vastly different. Those who are labor trafficked may be fearful of immigration or police and may feel like the family they have back home are being threatened. And so they often endure the abuse for these reasons. So now I'm going to take you through some of the indicators of labor trafficking, and similar to the indicators on sex trafficking, it's not a one-size-fits-all around labor trafficking situations, and really the signs and indicators are nuanced and overlapping. And so again, a combination of these indicators should be taken into consideration, as well as the general context of the situation. Some indicators of labor trafficking are individuals who are lacking the appropriate safety equipment or clothing to do their job. They are unable to come and go freely from their workplace or living quarters. They may be forced to work overtime without compensation. They don't have access to their ID or other forms, passport perhaps. It may be withheld or withheld by the employer. They may express fear or intimidation through facial expressions or body language. They may have someone else speaking on their behalf or providing direction or control. They may have visible signs of cuts and bruises and fatigue because, again, they're lacking those workplace protections. They may be underpaid or not paid at all for their work. And they may be having large portions of their pay that are going to unjustified or illegal fees. So there are a number of reasons that are intersecting on why someone who is being exploited for forced labor may choose not to report or to get help from a social service agency. Many migrant workers come to Canada and they may lack status. And so this lack of status and fear of being deported potentially back to an unsafe situation in their home country may keep them quiet. They may also have an employer-specific work permit and feel like they have few options or they don't know what their options or rights are. They may also be isolated and face cultural and language barriers to accessing assistance. They may have a distrust of public institutions, and they may have received threats from the employer to themselves, to their colleagues, and to their loved ones back home.